Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack 4 Business Podcast. Over 300 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack 4 business truly is? Your hosts are Bernie Fransgrote from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc.
Today's topic is a sales leader's blueprint. From the audience perspective, how do you successfully bring your MedTech innovation to market when the sales process feels impossible? That's what our guest is all about today, Dan Gibson from Gibson Growth Insights. Dan brings over 2 decades of expertise in sales leadership, specializing in MedTech. As a fractional sales consultant, he helps founders navigate go-to-market strategies, new market assessments, sales execution, with hands-on approach that delivers real results. Multiple industry awards. Knowing for crafting tailored solutions that drive business growth, Dan is a trusted advisor in the global medical device space. Beyond business, he's an avid cyclist and kayaker who enjoys life with his wife of 30 years, Irene, and golden retriever, Willow. Dan, welcome, and what is your favorite quote or saying, sir?
I've got a quote that I like from Stephen Pressfield, and it's, "A child has no trouble believing in the unbelievable, nor does the genius or the madman, but it's only you and I with our big brains and our tiny hearts who doubt and overthink and hesitate." The idea behind that is, I think that the older we get, the smaller our world begins to get, and we start to trap ourselves with the way that we think and our creative response to problems.
That's interesting when you think about the world politics without actually getting into the politics. We're going to get away from that because that's not what we're here to talk about. Do you have a business tagline that you work with?
It's unearthing new insights, cultivating success. We really pursue discovery.
So MedTech, to our audience that might not be familiar with it, what is MedTech?
Yeah, MedTech is actually pretty broad. It's a scope of products, services, solutions that really try to address health issues with our population. MedTech is very broad in its range of categories. You can have traditional hard devices like a pacemaker, or you could have pharmaceuticals, a statin that somebody takes for cholesterol, or some sort of an immunotherapy that aligns with a genetic disorder. Nowadays, we see software. Software is a MedTech product. It has the ability to diagnose and provide prescriptive recommendations to physicians and patients alike. So it's a broad range of products and solutions.
So how did you manage to get into this space? It's 2-3 layers off the beaten path, and it's a good path, but you don't wake up one day in high school, MedTech's for me. Let's go there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Bernie. Like a lot of things, I fell into it. When I look at my educational background, I studied science in uni. And then at the end of my first degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went back to school and studied business. Those two disciplines being blended together put me down this path. And I was very fortunate to have gotten an opportunity for an entry-level sales position with a consumer health company. The first job that I got out of school was actually selling contact lenses to optometrists. So what that did was it introduced me into this dynamic of healthcare provider and patient. The more time I spent in the profession, the more opportunities prevailed. I worked my way into medical devices and surgical products and more sophisticated applications involved with care situations. But I did fall into it like a lot of people do.
I think our town is very near a medical school. So we meet a lot of MedTech people. And if you aren't in their industry, these are really dull. How do these people find the skills they don't have to come alongside with their expertise?
Well, Wayne, it's a great question. And one of the things I became really aware of when I got into this industry was learning to work with people that have very sharply attuned technical skills, analytical skills. But when it came to building relationships, communications, what we would call soft skills, although I don't know if they're so soft, they never were forced to develop because they relied on the strength of those other things. So for myself, what I had to learn was how to speak their language and how to also align with them and recognize when they were exhibiting specific behaviors. It wasn't personal. That was just them. That's who they are. Their method of communication was different than mine. I just had to learn how to align and have a pretty thick skin.
Wow. I'm just thinking back to my time inside the hospital and different individuals in different sectors within the facility. And you can see that with physicians, even in the nursing staff. They have a certain persona because that's what jives well within their space.
Bernie, I was really fortunate in my career to have worked with a lot of different subspecialties in the medical field. And you started to identify cultural or behavioral norms that align with these different people. For instance, orthopedic surgeons are like carpenters. They're this jock, loud, outward going sort of person working the tools. That's what they're doing. And then you have an ophthalmic surgeon who's operating on eyes, which is all soft tissue, and they're like a watchmaker. They are incredibly precise in everything they do and everything they say. So there's all these different cultural norms and behavioral types that you get a chance to encounter, as you said.
So when a person comes up with a plan, they have an epiphany and they go, you know what, when do we do this? Software, hardware, pacemaker, new medicine. What motivates them? Is it something they've experienced? Is it something they've seen? Is there one day they sit there and they just, a mathematician where all of a sudden an apple drops and hits them in the head and he goes, gravity. What's that all about? Where do they get the epiphanies from? What drives it?
It depends on who they are. When I've run across MedTech founders, they come from really two buckets. There's the innovator who's maybe an engineer and a technical person, but not a clinical person. And then you have a clinician who has technical skills because maybe they've had earlier education in that space. The clinician who becomes an entrepreneur sees an opportunity to fix something that's broken or a gap that needs to be filled. They're a tinkerer. They're somebody who has that epiphany and says, I can fix that. I can build a minimally viable prototype in my garage and show people how this will work. Those clinicians are really applying it to their expertise and what they've learned, but tinkerers at heart, just the same. The flip side of these technical innovators, maybe an engineer or some other type of technical founder, those people are interesting because often they've had a personal journey that has influenced their thinking. Maybe they have had their own personal journey with their health. Maybe it's been a loved one, and they've come to this point where they have disbelief of the status quo. Why is this happening? This is crazy. This should not happen. That disbelief in the status quo kickstarts their thinking and makes them very passionate about solving that problem, filling that gap. So I think it really depends on where somebody comes from, but I would say unwillingness to accept the status quo is common between those two groups.
So in our podcasting, we've heard about inventors that thought they had revolutionized an entire industry and got stuck for political or socioeconomic reasons. What gets MedTech professionals stuck, and how do you unstick it?
Sometimes it comes back to people not being able to accept that their baby's ugly. Okay.
Sometimes people, the diaper needs to get changed.
That's right. Sometimes an innovator falls in love with what they've created and they don't recognize that it's perhaps not as groundbreaking, innovative, revolutionary as I initially thought. Right. And I think that it's common for that to happen because you get emotionally invested in what you've developed. And I think that sometimes what happens with innovators or entrepreneurs is they get really harnessed to their initial idea and won't let it go. And the idea they need to espouse is, I need to get insight and feedback in what I've done. Is there a better way to do this? I used to have a mentor named Joe Popovich, and his favorite expression was feedback is a gift. Keep that in the back of my mind. That is a place where a lot of these folks get stuck, just an unwillingness to understand or accept that your first try is not perfect, but it's a great idea. Let's canvas insights, perspectives from other people and iterate it with time and see where it goes.
Everyone has a journey. And I read your bio and it was pretty impressive. Are you a matchmaker? Are you an evangelist? Are you a cheerleader? What do you do?
Virginia, those days have long gone. 3 kids ago. I guess I'm a lot of things, to be quite honest. And I think it's a function of the fact that I've had the ability to perform a lot of roles over the course of my career. The nature of what I do right now is I look for opportunities with small to medium-sized medtech companies, typically, to help them grow their business in such a way that they need to appreciate some of these sales, business development, commercial elements that are just outside of their wheelhouse. So for me to do that, I guess the one role that I have is educator. I have to educate them, but in such a way that they understand the merit behind it and that it fits into the big picture that they have technically. So there's the educator aspect. There is a matchmaker aspect because after 30 years in the industry, I've been very blessed to have met a lot of great people around the world in different roles. So I do have the ability to reach out to people in my network and say, hey, can you help? They need a little bit of insight or a second set of eyes in something that they're trying to pursue. For me, I'd say there's the matchmaker element, the educator element, and analytical problem solving from a commercial perspective. That's the last piece of the puzzle. Being able to say to them, look, here are all these complex factors and variables in the medtech space that you have to juggle in order to move forward with this. The medtech space has to be one of the most complex verticals in the business world that people can approach because there's regulatory, there's reimbursement. There are so many different stakeholders that have to be satisfied and respected.
Yeah, the words clinical trials comes to mind. Yeah. So I know for medications, it does. I believe for certain hardware, it would also require it. And knowing that clinical trials, let's say drugs or pharma, depending on how drastic you're offering the results or how novel it is coming out, that could be several years. So is this like a long-term relationship of have some good funding or have some good grant money in the back pocket or perhaps be attached to pharma and then come see Dan and work our way through that process?
There's different ways to look at it, whether it's pharma or medical devices. They're two very distinct areas. When you look at pharma, the data that I had looked at a few months ago, is that it takes roughly $750 million to $1 billion to bring a pharmaceutical to market, which is mind blowing. It can take 10 to 12 years by the time it goes through all of the appropriate steps, trials, and certification. For somebody in that pharma space, they need sponsors with deep pockets to make sure there's some patency to what they're doing. The medical device space isn't that different because it's subjected to a lot of clinical trials. They start off with bench trials, then they move to animal trials, and then they move to human trials before they make any decisions on whether it's safe and effective. And regulatory agencies like the FDA and Health Canada and MDR in Europe, they have this final say on that. So really, for me, I don't get involved with people until they've got something that is solid, right? That has the ability to be protected from an IP standpoint and has the ability to go out there and go into the marketplace. Until then, those scaling organizations that have got a product that has been certified, that has IP protection, that some healthcare providers or institutions have taken an interest in and say, yes, that is going to help solve a problem. That's when I can really shine with them, is to jump in there and help them scale and grow and put processes in place that allow that technical founder to go back to what they should be doing. There's a big opportunity cost associated with having technical founders trying to be in a position of founder-led sales. Eventually, it has to change. They can't do it forever.
So I hear often about the 15-year overnight success. What have you learned and seen that would keep an inventor not banging his head against a wall and getting him to yes quicker?
There's a couple things there, Wayne, to unpack. You make a good point about that 15-year overnight success. I visited a company called IntelliJoint in Waterloo. They started their journey in 2008. The CEO of the company developed a prototype of a guidance system he needed for hip surgery as part of his capstone project as an engineering student. And then, as their director of corporate services said, in 2008, we hit a recession. This particular CEO couldn't find a job. So what did he do? He went back and did a master's. And then he iterated his capstone project into something better. Over the course of time, since 2008, they've brought it out and had it approved in the United States and Canada. And now they've got 60,000 surgeries accomplished with this product. So there's your overnight success. That is not really an overnight success. One of the things that people have to recognize is that the timeline is long, the work is hard, and the nature of this industry is that they require a burden of proof. They actually want to see some sort of proof that suggests that it's safe and that it's effective and it's making a difference. And it takes a long time to build that.
And it's expensive.
It's very expensive, and it's tough to find that money.
Yeah. So if someone came up with a brand new way of approaching something, they tried it either as a bench model or they may do in a pinch moment, they MacGyvered something. Does that form then part of that basis to get it expedited? Or if there's extreme demand for it. You see this with other technology areas. If you look at your smartphone, every year is another iteration. These companies spend a lot of money on patents to protect everything, but they're not. It's almost like even doing a car, getting a car, a new model out there. I know they have to do crash tests, et cetera. All of that's expensive. It seems it's a shorter life cycle to bring a car into play than maybe a new hip joint that requires less issues for people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example, Bernie. And it's very true. The timelines associated with MedTech devices are so much longer, and it's for the right reasons. It's not because the government is trying to be obstructive. It's not there to try to hinder competition. It's there because they want people who build these products, they want people that build these solutions to do it in a deliberate and a thoughtful fashion so that they can really guarantee a safe and effective product that is coming to market, that is respecting the patient, respecting the payer, right? Because healthcare typically isn't free. And in combination, these types of decision makers have the ability to benefit from those types of lengthy timelines. It's imperative that there be a lengthy timeline in order to respect the needs of patients, their families, and the institutions that provide care.
Dan, you're in Guelph, Ontario.
Correct.
I'm interested, North America has two very different healthcare models. Is MedTech sold the same way in both countries, or do you have to figure out what you're doing and what hat you're wearing? Are they different? How are they similar? I'm really interested.
They're very different, Wayne. And when you look at Canada and the United States, there's so many different attributes with respect to those two systems. In Canada, we've got largely a publicly funded healthcare system. We have a regulatory agency that makes decisions on technology and whether or not it's safe and effective to use. But what happens in Canada, of course, is that there's a much higher degree of centralized purchasing. Procurement in Canada is done in such a way that they're really trying to pursue what they call value-based healthcare, trying to bring products, services, solutions into the healthcare system that fit a need, but are not going to bankrupt our system. One of the things that you see in Canada is that there is probably a slower adoption when it comes to new technology because of that. It's not quite the Wild West here. People have great ideas and they want to bring technology into the hospital, but the problem is that new technology typically has a premium associated with it. They have to pay for their research and development costs and other things. And the system here in Canada has to be very judicious with the way that they make these decisions. The burden of proof is not only clinical, but it has to be cost-driven here in Canada as well. We don't have a lot of private healthcare here in Canada. It is starting to slide in that direction where patients have the opportunity to pay for their own healthcare. In the United States, it's very different. They have a system where there is a lot more privatization of health. People can pay for innovation out of pocket, provided it has been approved by the FDA. The way they reimburse products is very complex. Reimbursement strategy is very important for people that develop technologies. They have to get reimbursement codes for specific types of technology that address specific types of pathology. And it's quite a paper chase in the United States to do that. I'm sure there's a legion of lawyers and consultants that have made millions of dollars on it because of that. But that said, in the United States, it seems to be much easier to get new innovation into the pipeline and having it used compared to Canada currently.
If I have a car that needs repair and I go buy a transmission and it fails, I may be annoyed. I might even be temporarily out of the car, but I'm rarely going to die. Tell me about warranty when you're putting things in people.
It's not so much a warranty, but we do have a system. They do have what they call post-operative surveillance. They look for adverse events, right? And if they detect an adverse event, then it goes under investigation. They track these adverse events very closely, and manufacturers are legally obligated to submit these reports. So if you had a problem with a knee joint and you had to go back into the hospital and had to have what we call a revision, and they have indicated that there was a problem with the product, the manufacturer and the hospital would be in a legal position to report that to Health Canada. There is a robust process of tracking adverse events and problems that occur. Canada isn't as litigious as the United States, but we do have a strong system in place to track that sort of thing. Now, yeah, the whole problem that does occur though is that medical devices aren't perfect. Some of these medical devices do exhibit problems a few years down the road because they haven't been exhibited to the wear and tear perhaps during the trialing that large numbers of people would place on these devices. So this sort of thing is going to come up, and patients do have to have implants removed. They have to have revisions. It does happen as a means of ensuring their long-term health.
When you're walking to the store and you're with your wife and you see somebody and you go, I built that knee over there.
I haven't had that, but I tell you what I have had. I have worked in the ophthalmic or the eye surgery space for a long time. And one of the spaces that I worked in had to do with the lenses that they use for cataract surgery. When somebody has a cataract, they take out their natural lens and then put in an artificial lens to create the right conditions of bending light. One of the technologies that I used to sell, when the light hits it properly, you can just see this glint of light. It's almost like this little Terminator moment, right? And I have been in a room with people and I've seen that glint of light in a person who's over 55 years of age. I know what implant you have in your eye just by seeing that.
They really hear you.
It's a little weird when it happens, though, Bernie. I can tell you, it is that Terminator moment.
As long as both eyes don't start blinking and all of a sudden they go opaque and then open again. Then you're into the Men in Black movie, and good luck with that. On the horizon, there is talk about putting chip implants in the brain. And is that the new cutting edge? Is that part of the cutting edge? Or are there other cutting edge that's out there that's promising, that's going to revolutionize either the way people live on or live longer or come back from certain pathologies?
Yeah, there's a lot of technology out there, Bernie, that I think you're talking about Mr. Musk and his implant.
No, I wouldn't talk about it. He's putting a battery in there, right?
No, but there are some really interesting technologies out there that are cutting edge that have those types of effects of really changing people's lives, bringing them back to a state of health that they've lost. I was talking to a friend last week who's aware of a company in Boston right now. I'm not going to name the company's name, but essentially what they've done is they've built this device, which is, if you can imagine it, it is a coiled mechanism that gets threaded up through the vasculature and put in the brain, put near areas in the brain which are responsible for seizures and neurological issues. What this device has the ability to do is thread it through the vasculature to these very specific locations. An electric lead would come down off of this coil and fit into a battery pack, much like a pacemaker, which is then surgically implanted in the shoulder and has the ability to independently stimulate the brain whenever trouble occurs and restore quality of life to these people. It's what they call deep brain stimulation. And this company that's building it, they've got some fascinating technology. And I do think this is the tip of the iceberg with technology that will make enormous impacts on rehabilitation of people that have previously been very sick and have lost their quality of life.
In MedTech, somebody brings a product to the marketplace and it is going to be successful. Do they have to sell to an oligopoly to handle the rest of the process? Can an entrepreneur MedTech person survive on their own without the big corporations around them?
Good question. I think they can to an extent. One of the things that we realize now, or that we've seen, is that when you look at innovation in general in MedTech, it's the small companies that do things that are disruptive.
Yeah.
We know this. It's proven. Big companies, the big multi-billion-dollar entities, spend their research and development dollars on incremental improvements of existing products because there's not a lot of risk there for them. They're just making something. The small companies generally have the disruptive technology that is completely different, that is looking at healthcare through a different lens. If they're good communicators and have a compelling story and some data behind them, I think they can find the right partners. There is capital out there to support them. They've got to be able to tell a compelling story and get people to buy into their vision. That's the key thing. But they can do it. There's many types of funding out there. You can bootstrap it off the beginning, but then you've got angel investors. There's so many different angel investors popping up now. You've got venture capital, non-dilutive funds from the government if you don't want to give away equity in your company. So there's a lot of different ways to garner funds, but you gotta have the story. You gotta be able to make people understand why it should be funded.
So do you help them craft that story? Like it's once upon a time, right? Next thing you know, you got a little bit of a fairy tale, but it's focused on the topic. Do you help them craft it for particular audiences? Because the investor audience isn't going to be the same person when you're talking to a regulatory body saying, please certify this product for use, and here's the supporting data. Like you said, the people that create this stuff have a certain way of expressing themselves and acting. And if you're talking to that type of audience, it's not the same thing as an investor who goes, living large, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Let's swing that hammer.
No, you're absolutely right, Bernie. This is one of the most difficult things for technical founders when they are trying to get their idea out there in the marketplace, is that there are so many different people that they need to persuade. They have to get tuned in to the messages that all these different stakeholders want to hear, whether that is an investor or a hospital administrator or a surgeon or a government regulator. They all have a different message they need to hear. So yes, that's something I can help them with, to really tailor those messages appropriately to the people that need to hear them. The storytelling aspect, there's a continuum of emotional and rational information. Depending on who you're talking to, you've got to dial one or the other up or keep them in balance. So you either have to zero in on the emotional aspect, or it's strictly analytical and logical. And knowing how to tune those two poles of the continuum it's pretty important. The storytelling aspect for people when they're pitching their product isn't something that naturally occurs with a technical founder. It's just not a skill set they usually are flexing. So building a compelling message that hits a raw nerve with these different type of stakeholders is important.
Something that I'm interested in squaring the circle. You're talking to somebody whose knee is better, grandma's knee is better because of this breakthrough, and everyone's excited, and there's a story, and there's applause, and there's hugs. And then there are hospital administrators and service providers that are basically quantitative. These are analytics people. How do you sell grandma's better knee to accountants?
It's a good question. I'd like to think that people within the healthcare profession, regardless of their roles, have a real interest in generating great patient outcomes, or else they wouldn't be there. But they're subjected to a lot of different checks and balances that they have to juggle. One of the things I learned from one of my mentors is you have to take a step back and look at the whole system when you're dealing with those types of people. And you have to demonstrate to them that if you're bringing in a technology or a solution, it has wide-ranging repercussions, which are better for the whole system. For instance, if you were introducing some sort of minimally invasive surgery implant for a knee or an eye, you could cut down on the amount of time that a patient is under general anesthetic. Better for the patient. You could do more cases within a day, cutting down on the wait lists for a specific type of surgery. You could accomplish a day's surgery in less time and avoid overtime for nursing. There's a lot of different factors that come into play. So when you're dealing with people that are having to balance the books, let's say, for a healthcare organization, you have to take a step back and think about their larger situation and what they care about. They do care about patient outcomes, but they have to couch that within those other variables that allow that healthcare organization or hospital to persist and succeed.
Do you ever have a circumstance where you have a product that comes out, it's meant to address a certain issue with the patient? We'll stick with the patient piece. And there are other collateral positive points. So in other words, let's say it's the grandma's knee. It's a knee replacement. And not only does it easier for grandma to install or implant, but also it has other benefits towards staffing, medications, a host of other things. It's not apparent on the top set because the primary focus is to make it better for the patient. But do you scope out, project all the other positives that could come out of it?
Yeah, I think you have to, Bernie, because sometimes the decision makers that we encounter within the healthcare system are really dialed into their specific needs and what they do on a day-to-day basis. It's not because they have an unwillingness to look at other people's perspectives. It's just that's the world they live in. And sometimes you have to open that field of vision up for them, right? And say, okay, here are some of the other factors that maybe you haven't thought of. And yeah, like for instance, I talked about the eye surgery world that I used to live in. We pioneered a number of minimally invasive technologies that were used for eye surgery, which meant that people no longer had to get stitches in their eye, right? It used to be if you had a cataract out, you had at least a 5 millimeter, if not a 6 millimeter incision. And then after the lens was put in a patient's eye, the labor and hardship of throwing a bunch of stitches, which in the long term are uncomfortable for the patient, those get eliminated by introducing this minimally invasive technology. And because it's minimally invasive, they need less pain medication. In those cases where they were putting stitches in somebody's eye after cataract surgery, they had to put what we call a pain injection behind their eyeball to freeze their eye. With a minimally invasive surgery, they just put in eye drops, no needle. So there's all these different factors that you have to bring to the forefront about the patient, about the nature of the surgery, the costs associated with it, and the speed of recovery for the patient and how soon they can get back to doing things that they want to do, because that matters as well.
One thing that we just went through an election in Ontario,
Mm.
and healthcare, for right or wrong, was one of the big drums banged. If we're going to be optimistic, what could healthcare innovation, what do you see in 5 years that could actually be a breakthrough that goes all the way into the patient room that changes things for the better?
I think there's a couple of things, Wayne, that I would think of right off the top of my head. First of all, in 5 years, what I would see is that they're going to move a lot of services and a lot of procedures that are typically done in hospitals outside of the hospitals into freestanding clinics, where they can be done faster and in a more cost-effective fashion, not at the sacrifice of quality, not at the sacrifice of having the patient pay for it. But what I see the healthcare system doing now is they're becoming much more creative with where and how they deliver services. They're willing to sign creative agreements with other providers, take elective or minor procedures out of hospitals so they can do more major procedures like cancer, big surgeries that require multiple hours to achieve. So that's one thing I think we're going to see is we're going to see a change in the way the service is delivered and where. Another thing that I think we're going to see is, or that I hope to see in the next 5 years, is the development of new therapeutics or solutions that address chronic healthcare issues. We've got big chronic healthcare issues that are huge spends in the healthcare system for us, like diabetes, chronic heart failure, like hypertension. And what we're trying to find now are solutions where patients can be treated sooner and in a more advantageous fashion, so they're not becoming what we call frequent flyers in the health system. And this idea of frequent flyers, where you do have somebody maybe with CHF, chronic heart failure, they keep coming back to the ER because they're having problems time after time. If we can control that better and keep them in their homes and reduce the number of trips they make to the hospital in a year by 50% or 75%, the whole system improves, right? And the outcomes improve for the patient too. In 5 years, I'd love to see that innovation where we really dial into these chronic health issues and help people stay in their homes.
So it sounds like another avenue. And although I mentioned AI earlier and about implants, do you find that AI will also help? Because my smartwatch attached to my smartphone, he goes, hey, I'm loading a bag of something heavy back into the car from a local store. And all of a sudden, the watch says, did you fall? Did you fall? Alert, alert. Should I call help? And I'm looking at, about to fall? How are that smart technology coming into play? Do you see there's an integration that is, whether you're in the institution itself, whether you're at home, you're staying at home, do you see an integration that's starting to come about in that space where the devices now have more sensors on them, like even a Band-Aid or wound care, where it's going, you're not the right temperature, you're too hot, you're too cold, stuff like that. Do you see that coming as an evolution in the landscape?
Yeah, absolutely, Bernie. I think there's 2 or 3 really interesting spaces right now. When you look at machine learning and AI, we call that the Internet of Things, right? We're going to have these devices that are partnering in our healthcare and helping communicate potential issues to care providers or loved ones. That also allows people to return home from the hospital and have some sort of vigilance being applied to how they're actually doing. How are they doing from a health perspective? So there's that aspect. There's another aspect where we're seeing AI. I think AI is going to be used to improve workflow and processes in hospitals and make sure that the right people are in the right place at the right time and that care is being provided with the utmost efficiency because we have a shortage of resources right now. Lastly, there's AI as a treatment space. AI is becoming much more discussed and explored with clinical diagnosis. For instance, a radiologist gets a chest X-ray of somebody who they're suspecting that has lung cancer, and they run it through an AI platform first to determine if there's anything of note. And after that initial screening, if something pops up that needs another set of eyes, then you hand it off to a radiologist to look at. So there's all these different spaces where machine learning and AI are going to play a role, whether it's within an acute care hospital or in our own home, and allowing people to spend as much time there and really shift the care continuum in that direction.
Many of our podcast guests have a product or solution they sell, and they want to explain it to our listeners. And the idea is, okay, listeners, you heard this. So what is it that you want our listeners to do? How do we get a hold of you if there is a need?
First, if you want to get a hold of me, you can DM me on LinkedIn at my LinkedIn profile, or you can email me at dgibson@gibsongrowthinsights.com, or you can just go to my website, www.gibsongrowthinsights.com. Those are all spaces where you can find me. In terms of, if there are people out there that are MedTech founders and they're in that position where they are looking to grow and they're in that really funny place where it's still being governed by founder-led sales, and they have a technical founder who wants to get back to doing what they do as a founder and steering the strategic vision of their larger organization, that's somewhere I can jump in. Typically, I do a sales readiness review to see how they are in terms of that commercial function. We'll identify gaps that need to be addressed and then make recommendations accordingly.
I want to say thank you to Dan Gibson, my co-host, Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. Now, if you're in the MedTech space, whether it's drugs, hardware, applications, software, something you're going to stick in somebody's head, any part of the anatomy, to keep people on a better course, reach out to Dan. And he can provide you some great insights. He's got a long storied history inside the medical space and in sales.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, Wayne@motivate.uca. That is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website motivate.u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space; Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice. The views expressed by participants are their personal beliefs and do not represent the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. This podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for actions taken based on this episode. It is recommended that individuals seek guidance from their personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.